Welcome to the world of chess tactics. Our next step is to build you an arsenal of tactical weapons with which you can take on the savviest of opponents. During this part of the academy, you'll learn how to use your pieces in coordinated attack. We'll focus on the most fundamental tactical devices: forks, skewers, pins, removing the defender, and discovered attacks. Each theme we explore will at once make sense right away and possess countless layers of subtlety which you can unearth as you learn more and more about chess. It's important to realize that these very weapons are used by the world's greatest chess players in every game they play. Now you're speaking the language of the masters. The first component of our arsenal is called forks. We saw this weapon briefly in part 1. The fork is the most basic weapon in chess, and it's used at every level of play. You can envision it as a fork in the road, a branching of possibilities. Whenever one piece attacks two other pieces, it's a fork. As this course progresses, we'll see numerous examples of double attacks. The fork is the most basic and essential manifestation. In general, the more valuable the other two pieces, the more powerful the fork. In this position, the white knight forks the black king and queen. This is a royal fork, and the strongest of all possibilities. In general, the more valuable the other two pieces, the more powerful the fork. In this section, we're going to focus on knight forks, because this is the hardest piece to get used to. But first, let's look at some basic forks, where other pieces do the damage. In this position, white is in check but can turn the tables on black. What is white's best move? That's right, king e4 forks the black knight and rook, and they cannot defend each other. You see, the king can be a weapon too. In fact, towards the end of the game, we often use the king actively like this. In the beginning of a chess game, we want to defend our king, keep him safe, but when the board empties and there is less danger, he becomes a powerful piece that should be used actively. Do you see any forks for white here? You got it. Here, c4 forks the knight and rook. It's black to move here. Do you see any forks? Well done. Bishop e3 check wins the white rook. Do you see any forks for black here? Very good. Rook h5 forks the bishop and knight. This example shows how powerful a rook can be on an open board, forking pieces on opposite sides. Here, white can win the black rook with a queen fork, but there are two right ways and two wrong ways. Be careful. What's white's best move? Very good. One of the two right moves is queen d5 check, winning the rook. The queen is a very powerful attacker and can be devastating with long-range forks. Do you see the other one? That's right. One of the two right moves is queen a2 check, winning the rook. The queen is a very powerful attacker and can be devastating with long-range forks. The other fork, which would win the rook, is queen d5 check. This next position is similar to the last one, but with a wrinkle. Here black has one way to win the white rook, but there are three tempting but wrong tries. Take your time with this one. Find the best move. No, that's not quite right. Try again. Very good. The solution is Queen A7 check, operating on a long diagonal and a long file to win the rook. In this exercise, click on every square where the black queen can attack 2 or more white pieces without getting captured. Be careful. Now let's spend some time examining knight forks, a weapon you'll want to have at your fingertips. How can white win a piece here? Very good. Knight c3 check, forking the king and bishop. In this exercise, click on every square where the white knight can fork 2 black pieces. Well done. Now click on every square where a white knight could fork 2 black pieces without getting captured. Very good. In the middle game and opening, knight forks often take place on the f7 square, like in this position. Here the white knight forks the black queen and rook. One way this type of fork can arise is in an opening that I used to play when I was a kid, called the fried liver. From the beginning, I play e4, my opponents would play e5. You usually want to develop a pawn into the center of the board in the beginning. Then you want to develop a central knight. I played knight f3, attacking his e-pawn. My opponents would play knight c6, defending. Then I'd play bishop c4. Notice how I'm developing my pieces into the center of the board, and I'm preparing my king to castle, into safety. My opponents would play knight f6, and now I would play the move knight g5. A lot of the time they'd play a move like d6 here. Now, what's white's best move? Good job. Here you can play the fork that I showed you above. Knight takes f7, forks the queen, and rook. You see the bishop on c4 defends the knight, so the black king can't capture it. After knight takes f7, black should move the more valuable piece out of the attack, with queen e7, and white plays knight takes h8, and has won a rook. I can't tell you how many games I won with this trap as a 6 and 7-year-old boy, but I didn't show you this opening for you to memorize it and try to start winning chess games fast. Memorizing opening traps is the wrong way to study chess, because then we're not learning the heart of the game. The reason I showed you this opening is because I want you to see how patterns we work on with just a few pieces on the board can be repeated in much more complicated situations. So as this course goes along, just try to get a feeling for the essence of each tactical and strategical device I show you. These are the principles of chess, and they can be applied to any situation. The key is to learn the basics in a more simplified atmosphere so we can focus on what's essential. What should white play here? Find the best move. Well done. Knight c5 check. Well, here we see the white has two forks, knight c5 check and knight d4 check. We know that a rook is worth 5 pawns and a bishop is only worth 3 pawns, so let's win the rook. In chess, you'll often see a good move, then maybe a slightly better move. But take your time. Find the best move. What is white's best fork here? Very good. White's best move is knight e5 check, winning a pawn. Again, we see two possibilities, knight c5 and knight e5. This question is a little tricky because I don't want you to automatically fork the strongest piece at all times. Here knight c5 check would be a mistake because the forked knight can simply capture the forker. Knight takes c5. Remember, anytime a knight attacks another knight, the attack is mutual. It's important as I teach you attacking themes for you to consider the other side of the coin. We need to develop our arsenal while consistently learning how to disarm the opponent. This position is a little different from the ones we've seen so far. Here white is forking black's rook and bishop. Do you see any way for black to avoid losing material? That's right. Black can defend with rook a6. So after knight takes d6, he can recapture rook takes d6, and we know that bishops and knights are both worth approximately 3 pawns, so no material was lost or won. Whenever you fork, you want to find the most forcing alternative, so your opponent cannot defend. For example, take a look at the next position. Here white has 2 possible forks. What's the best move? Well done. Clearly knight b3 check is most forcing, and wins a rook outright. But what happens after the mistake, knight c6? White is forking the 2 black rooks. What should black play here? Well, there are a few ways to avoid losing a whole rook. First of all, either rook could move to a8 or d5 and defend the other one, so black would only lose the exchange, knight for rook, the equivalent of about 2 pawns. In chess, we call the trade-off of rook for bishop or rook for knight the exchange. So if you win a rook for a bishop, you've won the exchange. If you lose, for example, a rook for a knight, you've lost the exchange. But black has a better move after knight c6. Look for the most forcing escape. No, that's not quite it. Good work. Rook h8 check. Get out of attack with tempo. You see, if the rook is checking the king, white is forced to move out of the way. This type of forcing response as an in-between move is called with tempo. White has to move the king, after which black can move the a5 rook and have gotten out of danger completely. So on both attack and defense, you want to minimize your opponent's chances by finding the most forcing alternative. Okay, this problem might be a little tough because it uses a combination to set up a fork. You haven't yet learned the main idea that the combination is based on. It's coming up next, so don't worry if you have trouble. But try to solve it. It's good to stretch the mind. Here white can set up a powerful fork. Take your time and see if you find the combination. Click next when you see the move. The correct move is rook e8 check, sacrificing the rook to set up a fork. A sacrifice, sometimes called a sack by chess players, is when you give up material to gain down the road. You see, if the black king moves out a check, the rook can capture the queen. This is called a skewer and looks like an X-ray attack on the queen. You've already seen this. Black's only choice is king takes e8, and now I'm sure you see the fork. Knight c7 check wins the queen. After you finish this course, you'll have no problem spotting combinations like these. But first we have to internalize the building blocks. Now let's learn about pins and skewers. So you've already seen an example of the skewer in the last problem of the fork section. Pins and skewers are both versions of an X-ray attack, where the attacker has two defenders piled up in its line of fire. A skewer is more forcing because the more valuable piece is attacked first, and when it moves, the less valuable piece can be captured. For example, take a look at this position. Here, white can play rook h8 check, and when the black king moves to g7, f7, or e7, rook takes a8 wins the queen. This is a decisive skewer. A pin, in contrast, is when the less valuable piece is attacked first, but is pinned to its square because if it moves, the more valuable piece would fall. For example here, the black knight is pinned and can't move, because then the king would come under attack, so black is paralyzed and will lose the knight. It's important to realize that only bishops, rooks, and queens can pin or skewer, because they are the only long-distance operators. Let's start off working on some skewers. It's black to move here. Find the skewer. That's right. Bishop g2 check skewers the king to the queen. Now it's white to move. Find the skewer. Very good. Here white can play rook e3. The rook is defended by the f2 pawn, so after queen takes e3, f takes e3, white has won a queen for a rook. There's no way for the black queen to move to a square that defends her rook, because the a4 square is guarded by the white queen. White to move here. Do you see the skewer? Very good. Queen h6 check. Here you can really see the power of combining the queen's diagonal and horizontal powers. She can slice through the enemy pawn structure to move to the h-file to win the black rook all the way on the a-file. Here black has to decide whether or not to trade queens. Do you see how to set up a skewer? Usually in chess games our opponents don't just serve us up positions where we can use tactics to beat them. We have to prepare them. Take a look. Black to move. That's right. It turns out that by trading queens, black can win a rook. After queen takes f5 check, king takes f5, rook f8 check wins a rook. Now that you know about skewers, your alarm bell should always go off when you notice pieces lined up on the same diagonal, rank, or file. This is how the chess intuition works. We learn patterns and then instinctively put them together. This last one is a little tricky. It's okay if you can't get it, but I want you to try for a few minutes. Try to combine some of the ideas we've been talking about. It's white to move here. Any ideas? Well done. Knight e5 check. A great move. You see, white sacrifices with a fork to set up a skewer. The black pawn on d6 defends the e5 square. After d takes e5, now what should white play? Queen d1 check. Wins a queen. You see, if we learn these patterns, forks, skewers, and others, in time our intuition will tell us how to combine them. The pin is seen much more often than the skewer, because weaker pieces tend to be more exposed. Whenever you notice two or more of your opponent's pieces lined up on a rank, file, or diagonal, you should be looking for pins and for skewers. The essential power of this weapon is that it temporarily paralyzes a piece, renders it immobile. For example, in this position, the black knight is defending the black rook, but it is also pinned to the black queen by the white bishop. So after rook takes e4, black can't recapture without losing a queen. Remember, only long-distance operators can pin, so the queen, rook, and bishop are who we have to rely on. How can black use a pin to win the white knight? Very good. Queen a7. The knight cannot move or be defended, and next it will be captured. Here it's white's move. Do you notice any pins in the position? Well, the white bishop on h4 pins the black knight on f6. Now, how do we take advantage of that? Well done. Here we use the critical idea, attacking the pinned piece. e5 piles up on the paralyzed knight, and black is helpless to defend. Next move, e takes f6 will win a knight for a pawn. Now, if it had been black's move here, he should get the queen out of the pin, a move like queen c7. Liberate the knight. It's white to move here. Use the theme of attacking the pinned piece. Try to calculate both your best moves and black's best defensive tries. Very good. Bishop c4, attacking the knight on d5 and pinning it to the king on g8. Black has to defend with knight f6. What's white's best move now? Well done. Knight f4, piling up on the pinned piece. Black has to defend again, and he can, with rook d8. Now the black d5 knight is attacked by two pieces and defended by two pieces. But white can add more pressure. What's white's best move? Yep, that's it. Rook d1. Now the black d5 knight is dead. There are 3 attackers and only 2 defenders. Black's going to lose a piece. Before we get to this next exercise, I want to emphasize, once again, the importance of avoiding mechanical thinking in chess. If you just assume, for example, that a pinned piece can't move, then you're asking for trouble. Take a look at this position. Here it's black's move. Your knight is pinned down to the queen by the bishop on g5. And white has just attacked the pinned knight with e5. But it turns out that white is the one who loses a piece. Why? Black to move. Think creatively here. Good move. Knight g4 check. Gets out of the pin with tempo. White has to respond to the check. And after the white king gets out of the way, we notice that the black queen has opened up an attack on the white bishop. This is called a discovered attack, and it's another very important tactical device which we'll discuss a little later. But this isn't the only way to get out of a pin at the last minute. Check out the next exercise. White looks like he's in trouble here because the knight on b4 is pinned and attacked by both pawn and bishop. There is no way to defend it sufficiently, and there is no way to move it away with tempo, but white can save himself. Do you see how? No, that's not quite it. Try again. Very good. Rook f1 attacks the black queen and liberates the knight from the pin. If black were to take the knight, bishop takes b4. Then after rook takes f8, white has one material, the equivalent of one pawn, because a queen is worth 9 pawns, a rook is worth 5 pawns, and a knight is worth 3 pawns. So rook 5 plus knight 3 equals 8, 9 against 8. So after rook f1, the black queen should move, say queen e7. And after knight d5, the game goes on. White hasn't lost material. Here black's d6 knight is pinned, and white's last move was bishop c5, piling up on the pinned piece. What do you think about this position? Black to move. Good job. Knight e4. And suddenly white's position is falling apart. White's bishop, rook, and queen are all under fire. Do you see how the queen is attacked? That's right. Knight g3 check, forking king and queen is in the air. This is one of those moments in chess when you're caught juggling too many balls and you just can't keep everything straight. So remember, when we're pinning the opponent, don't blindly trust in the solidity of the pin. Part of the beauty of chess is in its flow and quality. Often the ground, once solid beneath our feet, becomes loose and shifting. We have to keep a flexibility of mind that allows us to flow with the ever-changing conditions. Before moving on, let's look at one more powerful pin. It turns out that in this position, black can use a critical pin to force mate in 3 moves. This one may be a little tough to spot, so take your time and see if you can get it. The theme is the paralyzed defender. Very good. Knight f3 check. A really powerful move. Of course, if king h1, then queen h2 and rook h5 are both checkmate. So white has to play g takes f3. It's forced. The paralyzed defender is the white pawn on f2, which is pinned to the king by the black bishop on a7. Remember, whenever a piece is pinned to the king, it really can't move at all. Now find mate in 2. Look for the pin. Good job. Queen g3 check is the hidden weapon. The pawn can't help defend the king because of the pin. White has to play king h1. What's the best move for black now? Good move. Rook h5 mate. This last position was an example of the type of combination you really will see in serious chess games. Black had to sacrifice a knight to set up a very, very difficult pin to spot, to win the game by force. Once again, I want you to notice the perils of thinking mechanically in chess. I believe this lesson holds true in life as well. It's easy to assume that certain elements of a situation will remain stable, but we have to stay present to the moment for all its evolving subtleties. More technically, returning to chess, people have the habit of assuming that pawns around the king are a fortress. But there are ways to slip through walls in chess. You just saw one of them. We saw that the pin can be very powerful, both as a way to win material by piling up on the pinned piece, or as a way to attack utilizing the temporary paralysis of a defender. Now we explore the latter theme a little more deeply. In chess, we don't just aim at our goals. Often we want to remove what is preventing us from achieving our goals. Or, more realistically, we aim to remove what is preventing us from preventing our opponent, from preventing us from achieving our goals, and so on. Let's check out some examples. It turns out that in this innocuous-looking position, white is completely winning. How? Whenever you look at a chess position, you should first notice the dramatic elements of the situation: material inequalities, possible checks, captures, or potential for tactics. Here we see that white's queen and bishop are lined up as a battery, aimed at the b7 pawn in black's camp. The black knight on d6 is defending the pawn. Our immediate instinct in such situations should always be to get rid of the defender. The knight on d6 is the only piece that's holding black's position together. Whenever one piece has such a grave responsibility, it becomes vulnerable to attack because it can't defend itself actively due to being completely consumed with the defensive responsibility. Given that setup, what should white play? Good move. Knight f5 forks the black queen and the only piece that defends mate. The knight clearly can't capture on f5 because queen takes b7 would be mate. But after the queen moves, for example queen g6, then after knight takes d6 check, white's next move will be queen takes b7 checkmate. White will win the game. Now we're combining some tactical themes. Black to move and win material. No, that's not quite right. Try again. No, that's not quite right. Try again. Very good. Queen takes b3. A fantastic sacrifice. It's only temporarily sacrificing the queen, though. If white doesn't recapture, then black has just won a knight for free. And after rook takes b3, then rook a1 check, a powerful skewer. King d2, rook takes h1, wins back the queen, and black comes out a knight ahead. So, we always want to notice potential tactics, what defends those tactics, and how we can remove the defensive idea. Now, once again with the aim of avoiding mechanical thinking, let's look at a variant of the last position. Here, once again, it's black's move. Does queen takes b3 still work? This one might be a little tough to spot, but it turns out that white can turn the tables here. After queen takes b3, it's white to move. Find the best move. Good work. Rook d8 check, a fantastic sacrifice that wins material by removing the attacker. Okay, this is the logic of the position. The black queen is hanging, but is indirectly defended by the rook on a8, which is about to deliver the powerful skewer rook a1 check. So the question is, in this precarious moment, can white throw a wrench into black's plans? The solution to this problem brings up another critical tactical device, called the in-between move, also known by its German name, Zwischenzug. In the middle of the tactics, white throws in the Zwischenzug, rook d8 check, and suddenly he's forced the removal of the attacker, who is just the key component of a tactic based on removing the defender. Black has to capture the rook. Knight e8 doesn't change anything after rook takes e8. So, rook takes d8, and now white can take the queen without getting skewered on a1. C takes b3, and white has won some material instead of losing a knight. So remember, you aren't the only one looking for tactics in a chess game. Many positions involve complicated combinations of exchanges like the one in the last position, and now you're learning to navigate through that jungle. Here it's white's move. Should white play rook takes b5? The answer is a resounding no. The idea is good, removing the defender of the back rank, but unfortunately the tactics don't work because of another in-between move. Rook takes b5 attempts to remove the defender of the back rank, but black can win material. Do you see how? f5 check, a powerful Zwischenzug, makes Luft for the black king in checks. Makes Luft in chess means opening up breathing room for the king so you don't get stuck in the back rank. f5 check frees up the f7 square for the black king, he can escape. White takes the pawn, king takes f5, and then black can take the rook takes b5, and after rook e8 check, there's the open escape route, king f7. Once again, always look for tricky in-between moves when you're calculating tactics. I'm showing these exceptions because it's very important for us to learn how to defend and attack with and from these tactical weapons. Also, once again, we should never tire of looking for subtle wrinkles in the position that may reverse the fate of the game. Such possibilities are much of the beauty and excitement of chess. Now, back to some pure removing the defender problems. Here it's black's move. What should you do? You got it! Rook takes f3, sacrificing the exchange to remove the defender of a powerful forking square. White recaptures, g takes f3. Now what? Well done. Bishop d4 check. And next, after bishop takes a7, black has won a piece. Again, whenever you see pieces lined up on a diagonal or a straight line, your spider sense should go off. Where are the forks, pins, skewers? Here white has the tempting option of just munching on the a6 pawn, rook a6 check. This is a free pawn, but there's better. It's white's move here. Find your best move. Very good. d5. At once opening up a discovered attack on the bishop on f4 and removing its defender, the knight on e6. White will win a piece here. Now you're getting used to combining tactical ideas. It's black to move here. What do you think? Good move. Queen takes f3 check. An excellent sacrifice. Now g takes f3. What's your best move? Knight d2 check. Now the king moves and knight takes b3. Black has won a piece. So you're sacrificing your queen to remove the defender of a critical forking square. Black to move here. Now this might be the hardest problem you've run into so far, but the answer is logical and you can get it. Take your time and enjoy the challenge. Remember, first notice your biggest potential threats, then notice what's defending against that threat. In this particular problem, you have to go one step further. You have to then notice how you can potentially remove the defender, but there is a defender stopping your attempt to remove the defender. So finally, you have to figure out how to remove the defender that is preventing you from removing the defender. Don't move until you see it. Okay, black wants to play queen takes g2 mate, but white's queen on f1 is defending the square. We want to get rid of that queen. Any ideas? Ideally, it would be nice to play bishop e2, because that would win the queen. But the white knight on c3 guards the e2 square. So the aim of our tactic is to get rid of the c3 knight. Now try to get it. Excellent work. Knight b5, forking the white rook on a7 and the knight on c3, which at this point is worth the queen because of the imminent threat of bishop e2, removing the defender of the g2 square. So queen takes b5 is impossible because of queen takes g2 mate. If knight takes b5, then bishop e2 will win the queen because it can't move. If white moves the rook, then knight takes c3 followed by bishop e2 will win the queen or mate. So white will have to defend the mate and give up lots of material in the process. Knight b5 is a great move that makes perfect sense when you think backwards in the position. Notice your goal, and then figure out how to get there. I'll discuss this manner of thinking more deeply in part 3, where we go into chess strategy. So don't worry if you didn't get this problem right. The idea is to learn from wrestling with real challenges. Now you're really experiencing what chess is all about. Now on to our next weapon, discoveries. We've already seen a couple discovered attacks in earlier positions in the course. This is a very powerful device, especially when the discovered attack is check, known as discovered check, like in this position. Here, white can win black's queen with the discovered checks knight d4 or knight d2, both opening up the white queen's attack on the black king while aiming the knight at the queen. Here you can really see the power of the discovery, because the black bishop can go after any white piece he wants to, because they are all on light squares. Now, what's the best discovery? Very good. Bishop takes g2 is one of two best discoveries. There's one more. Can you find it? You got it. Bishop c4 discovered check, winning the queen. In this position, it's black to move and win as much material as possible. You have to calculate several moves ahead here. Excellent work. Knight c2 check forces the king to b1. What's next? Good move. Knight e3 check, a powerful discovery. Next will be knight takes g4, winning the queen. Now it's white to move and win material. See the whole board. Good job. e5 attacks the black queen and opens up the 4th rank, so the white queen also threatens the black knight on a4. There is no way for the queen to move and defend her knight, so white will win a piece for a pawn. After queen takes e5, queen takes a4. A lot of chess players have the habit of focusing on one part of the board. Here you can see the importance of seeing everything. Black to move and win material here. What do you think? Be careful here. Notice where there may be some potential for discovered attacks, and then be sure to prepare your tactic properly. That's not quite right. There's better. Excellent work. Knight takes g4, queen takes g4, d5, opening up a discovery on the queen and attacking the bishop on c4. Now if white moves the queen, black will take the bishop on c4. But what happens if white blocks with knight f5? Remember, no mechanical thinking. Here it would be a terrible mistake to take the bishop, because then queen takes g7 would be mate. Often in chess, when you're just inches from victory, the opponent has some last tricks up the sleeve. What should black play here? Very good. An in-between move. Bishop takes f5, removing the attacker of the g7 square, and after queen takes f5, only then d takes c4 wins a piece. So be careful to set your tactics up properly. This problem is extra tricky. White is up a huge amount of material, and black doesn't have forced mate. Seems like a recipe for disaster. But black to play and win. Take your time here. My guess is this will be your deepest chess calculation yet, but try to find a pattern. Don't worry if this problem stretches your brain a little. The idea is to keep white in the box and take as much material as possible without letting him out of the box. Good work. Rook takes g2 check, king h1. And now? Yep, that's it. Rook takes g3 check. Discovery. Now, of course, the idea for black here is to take as much as possible without allowing white to stop the checks. So rook takes d2 would have been a terrible mistake, because then white could block the check with knight e4 and win the game. After rook takes g3 check, you see you're actually checking and removing the defender of the e4 square. White has to move the king, king h2. Now, if you haven't found the answer yet, then take your time and work from here. Excellent work. Rook g2 check. King h1, rook takes g4. King h2. Of course, if the white bishop ever blocks with bishop e4, then bishop takes e4 check, and it doesn't matter. So the king goes to h2. Now the rook returns to g2 check, forcing the king back into the box, king h1. Now you can go on to capture all the pawns and pieces on the second rank. So now your tactical arsenal is complete. The last exercise you did was designed to reinforce how important it is to learn basic patterns and then apply them in complex situations. By recognizing a pattern of discovered checks, suddenly you were able to do a 20-move chess calculation. This type of learning, by building from the core out, is central to my approach to chess. Now let's move on to the mastery quiz, which should help reinforce the ideas we've been discussing. In this mastery quiz, you'll be asked to find combinations that include 2 or more of the tactical devices you just learned. I may not tell you in which direction to look, but you can rest assured the solution involves 1 or more of the themes you were taught in parts 1 and 2. Sometimes the solution will involve mate, and sometimes it will involve winning or saving material. If you're having a really hard time with an exercise, just hit the hint button, and I'll tell you what themes to keep an eye out for. Good luck. It's black to move here. The answer involves a double attack. No, that's not quite it. Try again. No, that's not quite it. Try again. Very good. Queen h5, threatening mate on h2. White has to defend with a move like h3, after which b5 forks the two knights. You see, the black queen was occupying the b5 square, so you freed up that square for the pawn and attacked mate with tempo. In the future, to help you out spotting pawn forks, whenever two pieces are situated like these two knights here, next to each other with one space in between, a pawn can fork them. Notice that pattern. Keep it in mind. It's black to move here. Mate in 2 using a discovery. That's not quite right. There's better. Well done. Knight c3 double check. The bishop on g6 and the knight on c3 are both attacking the king. Notice, of course, that if the black knight were to move somewhere other than c3 or d2, if it were only check one way, from the bishop on g6, then white could capture knight takes g6 with a check of his own. So after knight c3 check, the white king is forced to move to a1. What's your next move? This is a very famous endgame position. It's white to move here. The idea, obviously, is to promote your pawn and win the black rook. Take your time. A skewer comes to play here. Good work. The correct move is rook h8, a really powerful trick. So now let's review this endgame for a minute. First of all, if the black king had been on g6, we see that the white rook can get away with rook g8 check with tempo. Then the king moves and b8 queen wins the game. If the black king is on f7, or e7 for that matter, then rook h8 wins the game. Because after rook takes b7, rook h7 is a skewer winning the rook. Otherwise, next move will make a queen. If black checks the white king with rook b2 check, ultimately he'll run out of space. King f3, rook b3, king e2, rook b2, king d3, rook b3, king c2, zigzagging in, the white king actively chases the rook to the b7 square, after which rook h7 again will win the rook. It turns out that in this position, if the black king is on g7 or h7, the position is drawn. The reason is, first of all, there's no check. There's no rook g8 check or rook f8 check with tempo, because if white plays rook g8 check here, black can just capture the rook and then take the pawn. Then black wins. There's no skewer also, because there's no room on the king side for the black rook to slip behind the black king. So the only way for white to try to win this position would be to bring the king towards the b7 pawn, to try to defend the pawn. Notice if this were the position, and then the white rook were to move, white would be winning, because the white king defends the b7 pawn, and next move would be to move ahead, b8, making a queen. The problem is that white can't do this. The second the white king gets to c6, black can start checking. Rook c1 check. The white king has nowhere to go. King b6, rook b1 check. King a6, rook a1 check. As long as the king stays on this half of the chessboard, black has perpetual check. If the king comes back, king b5, rook b1 check, king c4, rook c1 check, king b3, rook b1 check, king c2, now black can stay behind the passed pawn with a move like rook b5 or rook b6, doesn't really matter. And still white can't make progress. When the king comes back, king c3, rook can just come back to b1. And when the king approaches the pawn, the checks can begin again. So here you see the power of a rook behind the passed pawn. This is a rule in the endgames in chess. Rooks belong behind passed pawns. Here, the black rook is active. It can at once defend this pawn from promoting, and it can check the white king whenever the king gets close. The white rook, on the other hand, on b8, is stuck on this one square. It's in front of the pawn. If the rooks were reversed, like this, then white would win easily. The black rook can't move because the b8 queening square is defended by the white rook, and white can just bring the king into the game. King c4 to c5 to c6 to c7, and win. That's a basic theory of this position. It's white's move here. Sacrifice to set up a powerful fork. No, that's not quite it. Try again. No, that's not quite it. Try again. No, that's not quite it. Try again. Excellent work. Rook f7 check. A good sacrifice. King takes f7. It turns out that either white knight can take on e5, but let's say knight c takes e5, d takes e5, knight takes e5 check, forking the king and the queen. Now king e6, knight takes f3, and white wins the game. So keep your eyes out for sacrifices to set up forks. It's black to move here. See the whole board. Look for a fork. No, that's not quite it. No, that's not quite it. Yep, that's it. Queen a5 check is a very powerful move, forking the king on e1 and the knight on h5. This one might have been tricky to find because you have to see the whole board. Here it's white to move and win. Don't move until you see it. No, that's not quite right. Try again. Well done. Queen takes g8, sacrificing to set up a mate. King takes g8, And now what does white play? Rook h8. Checkmate. Again, I warn you against mechanical thinking. It's very easy to never even consider moves like queen takes g8. But if you notice the patterns, notice the bishop and the rook honing in on the h8 square, the knight on d6 guarding the f7 square, you'll start to feel the black king is in danger. Then you'll find a move like queen takes g8. Often we have a sense in chess that there's something in the position, long before we actually find what that something is. It's white to move here. Again, see the whole board. Very good. Rook takes g4, an excellent sacrifice. H takes g4, and now do you see the fork? Queen h2 check, going after the king on h8 and the rook on b8 on the opposite side of the board. White wins. Here it's black to move. What do you think? Way to go. Bishop takes c2 check. A great move, removing the defender. White has no choice but to take on c2 with the rook, and now obviously queen takes e1 check. The rook on c1 isn't guarding it anymore. Black wins the queen. Okay, in this position it's white to move. You have to combine a sacrifice, a pin, and a fork to win material. Take your time. No, that's not quite it. Try again. No, that's not quite it. Try again. Very good. Rook d takes d7. A very strong move. After bishop takes d7, what does white play? Now the point is that the bishop is pinned to the black king by the rook on h7, so it can't move. What is white's best move? Excellent work. Here white has knight e6 check, a powerful fork, winning the black queen. Again, we're training your chess intuition here. Whenever you see a king and a queen set up like this, with only one square apart, a knight fork might be in the air. Look for it. Let's continue with this position. Let's say that after rook d takes d7 check, black doesn't capture, but tries to run away instead. Let's say king b8. What should white do here? I don't want you to just play one move. Take your time. You have forced mate in 3 moves. What is it? You got it. Rook takes b7 check. King a8. Now mate in 2. We can't forget about this bishop on h1. Well done. Now rook takes a7 check is a double check. The bishop on h1 and the rook on a7 are both checking because it's discovery from the bishop. The king has to move, but of course the rook on h7 is guarding his other rook on a7. Black has to play king b8. Now what do you do? Well done. Here there are 2 checkmates. The first is rook h to b7. The king has nowhere to go. And the other mate is rook to a8 mate. This one is particularly nice because the bishop on h1 guards the rook all the way on the opposite corner of the board, and the rook on h7 cuts off the 7th rank. Black is in checkmate. White wins the game. Black's position looks rough here, but he has mate in 2. I actually used this tactic quite a bit when I was younger. Take your time. Black to move, force mate in 2. Good move. The solution to this problem is called a smothered mate. Queen g1 check is how you begin. This looks strange because the rook can obviously capture the queen. Note, the king can't capture it because the knight on h3 defends that square. After rook takes g1 though, the white king has nowhere to go. So knight f2 check is a beautiful move. Checkmate, a smothered mate. Here you can really see the power of the knight, the only piece that can jump over other pieces. Mates the white king alone. It's white to move here. This one might be difficult to spot. You have to set up a fork. No, that's not quite right. Try again. No, that's not quite right. Try again. No, that's not quite right. Try again. Good job. Bishop b4. A very strong move. The black queen has nowhere to go but to capture that bishop. Queen takes b4. Now white to move. Do you see the win? Knight a6 check. A royal fork. Hitting the black king on b8 and the queen on b4. White's going to win the queen. Because of this tactic, we refer to the bishop on b4 as being indirectly defended by the knight on c5. It's white to move here and win a pawn. You can take advantage of black's pin. Very good. Knight takes e5. A shocking and very strong move. Black has two options here. He can either take the queen on d1, which is obviously the tempting move, or he can play d takes e5. First of all, if black plays d takes e5, then white can play queen takes g4, and white's won a pawn. Sometimes you can turn your opponent's pin into your discovery. But black has a much more tempting move. After knight takes e5, what black wants to do is bishop takes queen on d1. The knight on f3, after all, was pinned. But what does white have in mind here? In this position is a beautiful mate in 2. Take your time. Do you see it? Yep, that's it. Bishop takes f7 check. The d7 square is defended by the white knight on e5, so black has to play king e7. Now mate in 1, knight d5, checkmate. A beautiful central attack. White's 3 minor pieces go after the black king and win the game. Once again, I warn you against mechanical thinking. It's very easy to see that knight on f3 and think it can never move. Always look for a way to get out of a pin with tempo. In this position, knight takes e5 turned the tables on black's pin. This position is actually from a game I played in the New York City Elementary School Championship in 1988. My opponent was a boy named Nicholas Proudfoot. He had the white pieces, I was black. Here I have forced mate in 4. Take your time, black to move. You just learned the critical idea in the last exercise. Good job. First, knight f2 check. King g1. Now it's mate in 3 for black. Take your time, play the best move. Notice, of course, the black knight can move anywhere it wants to with discovered check, but there's only one way to force mate. Do you see it? Good move. Knight h3 check. King h1. Now it's forced mate in 2. Take your time. What is it? Excellent work. A queen sacrifice. Queen g1 check. Very similar to what we just saw. The knight on h3 guards the queen on g1, so the king can't capture. But white's knight on f3 can take it. Knight takes g1, and now do you see the smothered mate? Knight f2, checkmate, and black wins the game. I actually went on to win this tournament. This was a very important tactic for me. Now, returning to the original position for a second, let's take a look. I just want you to notice that, of course, black couldn't initially play queen g1, because white can play king takes g1. The whole idea of the initial 2 moves, knight f2 check, king g1, knight h3 check, was that after king h1, queen g1, the white knight has to capture, smothering its own king. Of course, after knight h3 double check, white could also have played king f1. Do you see the mate in 1 here? It's a support mate. Queen f2. The knight on h3 also guards the f2 square, and black wins the game here. The reason I gave you the last exercise first is because you may have had more trouble with that one than with this one, even though this one was much more complicated. I want you to recognize the importance of learning patterns and then applying those patterns to other situations. Now for your last exercise, an extra challenge. This problem is really hard, and it involves thinking backwards. The first thing you should notice is that all of black's pieces are aiming at the king. You see the bishop on b7, the bishop on d6, the knight on d4, the queen on d7, they're all sweeping this way, towards the king's side. So you should immediately sense that there's a way for you to win here. Black can put these elements together to mate the white king. So when you see this type of situation, where all of the pieces are aiming at the king, your instincts should go off, your alarm bell should ring. There's a way to win here. Take your time. What do you see? It's very tempting in this type of situation to just run at the king, to try to play knight e2 check, or knight f3 check, or queen takes h3, sacrifice something, attack. A lot of people think that attacking chess is all about rushing forward, but it's not. Usually, to be successful against a strong opponent, an attack has to be very methodical. Here, there's one white piece, the knight on c3, which is guarding the e2 square, which turns out to be quite critical. With that in mind, find black's strongest idea. No, that's not quite it. Try again. Well done. The first move is a sacrifice. Rook takes c3. White plays queen takes c3. Now it's your turn. Forced mate in 2. Black to move. Very good. The idea of taking on c3 was to remove the defender of the e2 square. So black plays knight e2 check, king h1. Did you see the mate here? Here you use a pin. The g2 pawn, in fact, can't move because the bishop on b7 is now pinning it to the king on h1. So black can play queen takes h3 check, and in fact, that's not just check, it's mate. Black wins the game because of a fantastic pin. So this last problem involved sacrificing to remove the defender to open up a deadly pin to deliver checkmate. That's how we combine critical ideas to win chess games. Congratulations! Now you're in possession of a tactical foundation that you can build on for the rest of your chess playing days. Remember, these ideas we just studied are the building blocks of nearly every complex chess creation. As you grow as a chess player, you'll learn how to combine the very themes we just discussed to orchestrate beautiful, harmonious attacks. Now we're ready to enter the subtle world of chess strategy.